The Cold War is often described as a conflict that ended decades ago, a chapter of history closed with the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of a divided world. Yet history does not truly end when borders change or ideologies collapse. Some events reshape the foundations of society so deeply that their influence continues long after the conflict itself disappears from headlines and textbooks. The Cold War is one of those events. Even in 2026, its presence is felt in the way governments think, societies organize themselves, and individuals experience everyday life. The Cold War did not vanish, it adapted. It dissolved into structures, habits, and systems that now feel normal because they have always been there. Understanding this hidden influence is essential to grasp why the modern world looks the way it does and why many of its anxieties feel strangely familiar. Living with the specter of destruction during the Cold War, the world learned how to live under the constant possibility of sudden destruction. This was not a distant, abstract fear. From the late 1940s through the 1980s, the US and Soviet Union built nuclear arsenals capable of destroying the planet many times over. Governments delivered civil defense films, schoolchildren practiced duck and cover drills, and communities built fallout shelters. Entire generations were raised with the understanding that the future was uncertain by default, that safety depended on vigilance, and that peace was fragile. This mindset reshaped how people planned their lives, how governments justified control, and how societies responded to uncertainty. It also produced a paradox. Although the weapons were never launched, the psychological infrastructure built to manage that fear never disappeared. People learned to compartmentalize existential dread and to continue their daily routines under the shadow of annihilation. This collective mindset extended beyond nuclear threats. As the nation moved from World War II into the Cold War, domestic security became an even higher priority. In the United States, tension between Washington and Moscow led to a proliferation of secretive institutions. The National Security Act of 1947 created the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and, 5 years later, the National Security Agency, NSA, was founded. Both were forbidden to spy on Americans, yet the fear of communist infiltration blurred those legal boundaries. The NSA produced massive volumes of reports and intelligence. Programs such as the FBI's COINTELPRO and the CIA's Operation Chaos surveilled civil rights leaders, anti-war activists, and ordinary citizens in the name of national security. These activities normalized secrecy and a sense that invisible threats lurked everywhere. Although many of these programs were exposed and curtailed after the 1970s, the culture of caution and emergency powers they created has endured. Fear as a governing tool. One of the most lasting impacts of the Cold War is the normalization of fear as a governing tool. During those decades, governments discovered that fear could be organized and sustained. Populations were trained to accept secrecy, surveillance, and emergency powers as necessary elements of survival. People learned to live with abstract enemies and invisible dangers. Over time, this state of alert became routine. In 2026, the same framework still exists, only the threats have changed. They are no longer limited to rival superpowers but include cyber warfare, economic instability, pandemics, terrorism, and artificial intelligence. Yet the response remains familiar: constant readiness, limited transparency, and the expectation that citizens will adapt without question. The architecture of modern surveillance is a direct continuation of Cold War logic. The intelligence agencies that expanded dramatically during the Cold War collected information not only on foreign adversaries but on domestic populations. Secrecy was normalized and accountability was secondary to national security. Today's surveillance is no longer hidden behind concrete buildings and classified files. It exists in digital form, embedded into everyday technology. Your phone, your internet activity, your location, and your behavior are continuously monitored, not because the Cold War continues, but because the systems designed during that era were never dismantled. Instead, they were modernized and scaled to fit the networked world. The technological legacy. Technology itself carries the fingerprints of Cold War competition. Many of the tools that define modern life were accelerated or created because of military rivalry. Space exploration, satellite systems, computer networks, and early artificial intelligence were not driven by curiosity alone, they were driven by fear and strategic necessity. The Internet, for example, traces its origins to the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, ARPANET, a Cold War defense project designed to ensure communication after a nuclear attack. ARPANET was the product of computer communications development spurred by military concerns that the Soviet Union might use jet bombers to launch surprise nuclear attacks. As historian John Naughton notes, the Semi-Automatic Ground Environment (SAGE) defense network of the 1960s demonstrated the enormous power of interactive computing. During the early 1960s, it is estimated that roughly 70% of all U.S. computer science research was funded by ARPA. The resulting network prioritized decentralization and resilience so communications could survive catastrophic attacks, not openness or privacy. When you rely on global communication networks, navigation systems, and predictive technologies in 2026, you are interacting with systems built on assumptions formed during a time when survival was the primary goal. Other technological innovations carry similar imprints. Space exploration began as a geopolitical contest yet produced weather satellites, GPS navigation, and global communications, while early artificial intelligence emerged from military funding for pattern recognition and cryptanalysis. Even today, national investments in AI and quantum computing echo the same logic of strategic advantage. The rivalry may have shifted from Washington versus Moscow to multipolar competition that includes Beijing, Brussels, and private corporations, but the mentality of innovation for deterrence remains. Redefining security and deterrence. The Cold War also reshaped how societies define security. During the conflict, security was not understood as the absence of danger but as the ability to deter it. Safety depended on the promise of retaliation. This logic became deeply embedded in political and military thinking and did not disappear when the Cold War ended. Modern geopolitics still operates under deterrence, whether nuclear, economic, or digital. Nations build power not necessarily to use it but to signal readiness and strength. The global arsenal of nuclear weapons and arms control treaties negotiated during the Cold War still frame international relations. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, 1968, and subsequent arms limitation talks were direct responses to the arms race. These agreements continue to underpin efforts to manage nuclear risks and influence how states approach new weapons technologies such as hypersonic missiles and autonomous systems. Local conflicts that originated during the Cold War also endure. The Korean Peninsula remains divided, and the Korean War has technically never ended. Afghanistan's decades-long turmoil has roots in Cold War interventions. Ongoing tensions in the Middle East and parts of Africa likewise trace back to superpower rivalries. Current instability in these hotspots cannot be understood without turning to the Cold War in search of roots and causes. At the same time, international institutions created or strengthened during the Cold War continue to shape global politics. NATO and the European Union, both rooted in the bipolar era, have expanded and adapted. The North Atlantic Alliance grew from 12 members in 1949 to 32 by 2024. Critics note that even after the collapse of the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, NATO continued to strengthen, reflecting how threat perception persisted. The inclusion of Finland and Sweden in 2024 shows how modern crises, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, activate Cold War-era security structures. This mentality influences everyday life as well. Workplaces emphasize constant productivity, preparation, and competition. The language of staying competitive and being on the cutting edge echoes deterrent thinking. In a world where economic strength is a form of power projection, citizens internalize the belief that personal success is tied to national security. Binary politics and polarization. Political polarization is another hidden inheritance of the Cold War. The conflict divided the world into rigid ideological camps, leaving little room for nuance. Disagreement was framed as threat, dissent was often equated with betrayal, and loyalty became a survival requirement. Societies were trained to see the world in binaries: us versus them, safe versus dangerous, right versus wrong. This framework persists, shaping political discourse, social identity, and the way people interpret opposing viewpoints. Compromise is often perceived as weakness rather than cooperation because that lesson was reinforced for decades. The cultural Cold War also weaponized art and information. Modern political messaging retains this legacy of information warfare. Social media campaigns and misinformation often frame issues as battles between good and evil, perpetuating binary narratives that hinder collaboration. Education as preparation for conflict. Education systems were transformed by Cold War priorities. Schools became instruments not only of learning but of national preparedness. Children were trained to follow procedures, trust authority, and perform under pressure. Drills and standardized systems emphasized compliance and order. Critical thinking existed but within controlled boundaries acceptable to national narratives. Today, education still reflects this structure, prioritizing performance metrics, efficiency, and conformity to systems designed for stability rather than reflection. The result is generations skilled at functioning within existing frameworks but often disconnected from questioning why those frameworks exist. These priorities endure today, with emphasis on STEM skills and innovation. Competitions framed in terms of national competitiveness. While valuable, this approach can limit creative problem solving and empathy, echoing Cold War education campaigns that tied academic success to national survival. Culture of apocalypse and anxiety. Culturally, the Cold War left behind a permanent fascination with apocalyptic imagery. Films, literature, and television repeatedly explore themes of collapse, invasion, and extinction. Classics such as Dr. Strangelove, The Day After, and Threads captured nuclear nightmares. These stories resonate not simply because they are dramatic but because they mirror unresolved collective anxiety. Entire generations grew up believing the world could end suddenly without warning. That belief shaped imagination, storytelling, and emotional expectations. In 2026, fictional threats often echo Cold War fears: faceless enemies, invisible dangers, and technologies that escape human control. These narratives persist because the psychological tension that created them was never fully resolved. The entertainment industry also harnesses the aesthetics of the Cold War. Retrofuturist design, synth-driven soundtracks, and analog glitch effects evoke an era when technology felt simultaneously wondrous and terrifying. Video games revisit Cold War settings and alternate histories, inviting players to navigate moral choices shaped by global rivalry. Cultural revivals of 1980s fashion and music speak to a nostalgia that is both comforting and unsettling, the longing for a simpler binary world, despite the constant fear that defined it. This fascination highlights how deeply the Cold War embedded itself in collective memory. Psychological training for uncertainty. Perhaps the deepest impact of the Cold War is psychological. Humanity learned how to live with existential instinct during those decades. People adapted to carrying the awareness of possible extinction while continuing daily routines. This ability to function under looming catastrophe did not disappear, it became part of collective behavior. Today, global crises trigger familiar emotional responses: anxiety, burnout, hypervigilance, and emotional fatigue, not because they are identical threats, but because society already knows how to live in permanent uncertainty. The Cold War trained humanity to coexist with dread, and that training still shapes mental health patterns in 2026. The lingering shadow. The Cold War officially ended without a final confrontation, without closure, and without collective processing. Its legacy did not explode, it dissolved into institutions, technologies, and habits that define modern life. Many analysts argue that a Cold War mentality of distrust and a deeply rooted rivalry between Washington and Moscow persists in international rhetoric. The major institutions that govern the so-called West continue to rely on frameworks forged during the Cold War. The war in Ukraine, the expansion of NATO, and renewed nuclear arms debates reveal how easily Cold War patterns can resurface. Meanwhile, emerging tech wars between global powers echo the original arms race. Understanding this hidden impact is not about fear or nostalgia, it is about awareness. Recognizing that many pressures of contemporary life are echoes of a world that spent decades preparing for its own destruction allows us to make more conscious choices. We can question whether constant vigilance is always necessary, whether secrecy truly serves security, whether competition should be our default mode, and whether polarization is inevitable. By acknowledging the Cold War's shadow, we can begin to dismantle the mental frameworks that keep societies locked in cycles of anxiety and mistrust. The Cold War may be history, but its influence is still alive, quietly embedded in the world we live in today.